Hi there treacle tarts. Today I'm going to talk about something known as trauma bonding, aka traumatic bonding. And the reason I want to talk about this specifically is because it has been an area of interest for me, both in terms of being able to help my clients more effectively to understand some of the dysfunctional or even abusive relationships that they are experiencing. And it's also been useful for me in terms of understanding more about my own personal journey and my interactions and brushes with this specific kind of bonding, this specific kind of connection. So I thought what I would do is create this resource to help other people to potentially identify clusters of symptoms, let's say, or characteristics that you can see in a connection that might qualify it as a trauma bond or a traumatic bond. Now, there are loads of different definitions for different things when it comes to psychology, right? There's loads of different kind of names we can use, labels that we can use to refer to specific things that we're going through or our clients are going through or friends or family members. And I think that a lot of those labels can overlap and there can be a lot of grey areas and fuzziness with regard to what falls under one kind of label and what falls under another. And I think that's specifically true when it comes to labels that we use to describe specific kinds of connections or human dynamics. And I've learned this a lot with my own interest in psychology and my own interest in looking at various different labels and how they are defined and that kind of thing, and what kinds of clusters of characteristics go under a certain label. I think particularly when we look at different kinds of connections and human dynamics, it can get very labelly, and I know that a lot of people don't like that and aren't fond of that. But I think that there are plenty of labels that are really useful to use as a way to figure out whether or not you are actually labouring under a relationship that fits this mould, whether or not you are in danger of emotional abuse, for example, or whether or not you are vulnerable to being controlled by someone or disempowered by someone. I think that the label trauma bond and what it means is probably quite a useful label to understand more about, and so that's one of the reasons that I'm making this particular video. I just felt like it's high time I did something like this and put it out on my channel. It might be really useful for people who are either trying to understand some of the shit they went through in former relationships, or they're trying to get to grips with a relationship they're in now, or maybe trying to help someone who has a relationship that is fitting this kind of mold and kind of exhibiting these kinds of characteristics. So that's why I've chosen this moment to direct your attention towards trauma bonding, what it is, how you can spot it and how to deal with it. The person who actually coined the phrase trauma bonding is a guy called Patrick Carnes, Dr. Patrick Carnes, and he actually has his PhD in counsellor education, and you may know him more popularly as the person who coined and popularised the term sex addiction and started talking a lot about sex addiction and how to identify it, and really actually kind of, I suppose, giving credence to sex addiction under the umbrella of addiction and talking about how to deal with it. So he's definitely put his work in, and I by no means know everything about his career and everything that he's managed to achieve with his career. I do definitely love him for coining the phrase trauma bond and talking more about what it is and how it can be characterized, because that has been really helpful for me in particular. So whilst we would see healthy bonding as bonding which principally involves the sharing of positive or meaningful experiences to develop intimacy, in a trauma bond, which is by contrast an unhealthy, a dysfunctional bond, the intimacy is developed by a sharing of negative, unpleasant, very high drama, usually high intensity experiences together, which build something that feels like intimacy and something that masquerades very well as intimacy. And most of those negative experiences are built on a kind of reward and punishment kind of platform, where normally one person within the connection is withholding the reward from the person who then needs to jump through a number of emotional hoops to get that reward. And so it sets up the punishment and reward system for the other person in the bond, and both people can find this experience and this type of bond addictive, but it's actually unhealthy for both parties, especially for the party who is doing all of the jumping through hoops and all of the attempting to receive the approval, the love, the reward, if you like. Usually the negative experiences that characterize a trauma bond, that are the experiences where two people build their intimacy with each other, are also experiences which tend to misuse sex, fear and excitement to entangle the two people together. So it's usually, like I said, the case that it's quite high high drama. It's characterized by blazing rows or just very dramatic occurrences that then need to be talked through or dealt with. And in that way, the two people are bound in this intimacy. But the vast majority of the negative experiences are what characterize the bond. The short-lived experiences of the two people being in harmony, being at peace with each other, simply having a nice time together are very short-lived. They are not what characterize the bond, and they are not where the two people find that most of their intimacy is developed, if you will. A trauma bond doesn't necessarily have to involve any sexual abuse or physical abuse, although it certainly can do. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video about the overlap between different things and the overlap between different labels. I think a lot of people might listen to some of the things that I'm going to say about trauma bonds in this video and think to themselves, well, that just sounds like emotional abuse. Why do we need this special kind of terminology for it? But I do think it's useful. I do think the term trauma bond holds a very specific set of characteristics, and I'm going to talk about some of them in the course of this video. And I'm also going to kind of use some of my own experiences to kind of deepen into what I really think a trauma bond looks like and how to free yourself from it. I do think that the key way that we define trauma bonding as being a bond where most of the key experiences that create the potential for intimacy and connection are negative experiences, unhelpful, unhealthy, high drama experiences. I think that's a really important distinction. And I think that a lot of people are experiencing a trauma bond or have experienced a trauma bond and they don't realise that they have. I do think it's really important as well to recognise that in trauma bonding, that reward and punishment system that's set up through having to somehow resolve what's happened with the big bad yucky situation, which is normally a row or something of that nature, is very addictive. It's addictive for both parties. It's addictive for the perpetrator, if you like, to have that sense of power and control. And it's also addictive for the person who is striving to receive the approval, the praise, the acceptance, the eventual love that they are really trying to get to, that constantly feels like a carrot on a string that's never getting any closer to them. I think that that can be very addictive. And yes, there is definitely an emotionally abusive component to that. I think, as with all emotional abuse, there is a massive spectrum of one's awareness of whether or not they are being emotionally abusive. I think some people outright know the games that they're playing, the things that they're doing to manipulate, to coerce, to disempower. I think other people are being emotionally abusive without actually recognizing it. And I think that's very much where most of the potential for recovery comes from, when someone actually looks at their behavior point blank and goes, oh shit, that is what I'm doing. And I think there is a lot of potential for recovery in those cases, probably much more often, because it's somebody that genuinely didn't mean it, and slowly but surely, or immediately in a very revelatory way, suddenly goes, fuck, I'm playing games, or I'm trying to elicit a particular response from this person, and it's not fair and it's hurtful to them. So it's not always the case that it's super Machiavellian and super self-aware. I think a lot of emotional abuse, I mean, I'm not talking about statistics or anything like that, I don't know, basically. And plainly, I don't think we could look at statistics like that for emotional abuse. But I do think that in a lot of cases, emotional abuse is just something that is done in a very unaware state. Just as much as I do believe that a lot of emotional abuse is also carried out from a very conscious place, and there's a spectrum in between those two. You know, it's a lot of grey, it's a lot of shades of grey, and I'm definitely in that camp of believing that it's not black and white. I don't think that's necessarily helpful. Those who are most at risk of being ensnared by a trauma bond are those, I think, who suffer with low self-esteem, those who might be very lonely and want to feel that sense of deep connection to someone, and also those who were raised by a parent who withheld their love or withheld their approval a lot. And that was actually, I think, how I ended up in my trauma bond. I think that it was about trying to extract the love and the approval from a parent who often dangled it just above my head or just at a distance, you know. And I think that was a big part of it. I think there are layers to this shit, for sure. I think the way that my personality is set up, I have to be very careful that I don't entertain trauma bonds, for sure, because I'm very romantic, I suppose you could say. No, that's fair to say. I'm romantic. And I think a lot of people that just have that outlook on love and intimacy also need to be careful, whether they had loving parents or accepting parents or not. I think that certain character traits and certain personality types may be more susceptible to trauma bonds. But certainly I do think it's fair to say that people who never felt like they received that love, that acceptance from their parents, they were either rejected by a parent who was emotionally cold and distant. You know, they were raised by a parent who might have had some narcissistic tendencies, abusive parents of every stripe. I think those people definitely are at risk of being ensnared into a trauma bond where the majority of the intimacy is centered around high intensity, negative experiences, and this almost feeling that you're just about to get what you want, or you've just gotten what you want, you've got the acceptance, you've got the makeup, you know, that makeup time where you're together and you're close and you've made love or whatever and everything feels good again, and then suddenly, you know, the rug is pulled out from under you and you're on this roller coaster again, and it has that addictive quality to it. During the reading and the research that I've done about the nature of trauma bonds in particular, I've actually read that a trauma bond is a little bit like a hormonal roller coaster, and I think that's very true. If you think about the way that a trauma bond is set up, where it's plain sailing for a little while and then there's this great big tumultuous chaotic thing that you've got to get through and you've got to get back on the same page again, and then you feel loved by that person again or accepted and you've maintained the relationship, that is a huge roller coaster, and there is a definite chemical response that goes on there. You've got the start of the drama, the intensity, the negativity, you're not on the same page, it looks like you're at risk of losing this other person, it's highly stressful, so you release cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and you've got lots and lots and lots of cortisol, the stress hormone, getting you wound tighter and tighter and tighter. And then as you resolve everything, as you get that reward, you've got that endorphin spike, you've got that sense almost of euphoria, and you're at peace. And yes, there is definitely an addictive quality to that. You've got the anxiety, you've got the striving to get things back where they need to be again, and then you've got that release, you've got that feeling of harmony again, you have got that feeling of calm again. It's wash, rinse, repeat. It's fucking addictive. I was looking back over some notes that I made about trauma bonding a while ago, and I found this, and I think this is really important to read to you guys. It says, inconsistency is a tactic for heightening the bond. This is very true. The inconsistent nature of the bond is what makes it addictive, and it's what makes both people stay in it. Usually one person to have the control and enjoy the feeling of reenacting the control, and the other person stays in it because they're desperate to keep hold of the controller. So the inconsistency is definitely a tactic. It heightens the bond. You never know what's coming, so you can never feel peaceful and at ease for too long, because that's not how the trauma bond is fed. That's not how it gets its sustenance to continue. And I've also written, intensity which builds and becomes addictive to both parties is characteristic of a trauma bond, but the intensity is addictive for different reasons. The ensnared wants to get to know or help the instigator, and the instigator likes the way that that attention feels, but doesn't generally reciprocate the interest and concern. So if you've got somebody, for example, who is the instigator, who is avoidant in their personality, they withhold love, they withhold affection, they start arguments in order to push you away from them, and then you've got the what did I call the other person? You've got the ensnared, who then wants to do everything to help the instigator, to show the instigator, like, you're wrong, I love you, let me help you. That's addictive for both parties, but it's addictive for the instigator because they get to feel that sense of being needed and being loved and having so much done for them and being able to enact that control. The ensnared finds it addictive because they want to get to that point again of feeling that they're close to the instigator, feeling like they're on the same page again and they've managed to keep the instigator as a partner. One thing that it might be really difficult, in fact it might be nigh on impossible for the ensnared individual to realise and accept, is that the instigator just doesn't feel the same way about them. No one who claims to love you, care about you and want the best for you should play games with you or push you away like that, or start arguments with you to create a panicked needy response from you. That's not love. That's not love. That's not how it should operate. And it's very hard sometimes for the ensnared individual to recognise that and see that for what it is. They convince themselves that both them and the instigator are in this thing together, and it's like Siamese and nobody can really understand it except the two of them, and they're just so connected. With a trauma bond, it's set up to feel that way, but it is not that way in reality. And it's very hard for the ensnared person to realise that time and time and time and time again, they're being yanked out of their comfort zone into another argument, or being pushed away, or having communication withheld from them, you know, being made to feel like they're not wanted, or being whipped up into a jealous rage. It's hard for the ensnared person to understand that the instigator is indeed just that. They are an instigator, and they are instigating that to their supreme emotional advantage. It's feeding something in them that they feel that they need. Usually the ensnared person, the person who has less power in the trauma bond and who is usually striving for the approval of the other, tends to start to feel that the relationship constitutes all of their positive experiences in life. They often don't want to hang out with friends or family anymore, or they don't pursue their artistic or spiritual ambitions or hobbies. They're not interested in activities outside of the relationship. They do start to convince themselves that all of the positivity and joy that they require is invested in this one relationship, which then makes the relationship even more problematic by nature, because the relationship itself is characteristically unstable. It's fundamentally unstable by design. It's supposed to be unstable. That's what gives it its very addictive, very intense quality, right? So you know, a lot of ensnared people who are in that less empowered role in a trauma bond will start to just see their relationship as the whole world. You know, their relationship with this person is everything they're focusing on, and that can be very dangerous and very sad. The instigator in a trauma bond is going to operate slightly differently depending on, you know, what their personality traits are, etc., and how they're really viewing things. So it's not like a cookie cutter thing where every trauma bond is the same. There are going to be some people that are instigators in a trauma bond who are, like I said, physically or sexually abusive, or severely emotionally abusive, calculating, manipulative, etc. There are going to be other instigators who have a severe avoidant personality type. They may be deceptive, they may have more than one partner, and they might be cheating and keeping partners from each other and keeping knowledge of partners from each other. You might have some people who are instigators in a trauma bond who are you know, emotionally unavailable, and yet they masquerade as an emotionally available person for this person they're in a relationship with, but actually they don't want to be emotionally available. They are cold, distant, or avoidant. They are damaged human beings who don't want to be connected to people, and yet they find that they receive a certain kind of enjoyable response when they masquerade as someone who is emotionally open and honest and giving, and then pull away. And that pulling away creates such a reaction in the ensnared person that it is appealing for them as the instigator. That's actually what happened to me with my own trauma bond. It was very much like I'll give this and I'll show you that this is what I want from you and this is who I am, and I, you know, want to open up to you, and then it was snatch that away, almost like that never happened. I don't even know you. We're not even close. You know, fuck you. You mean nothing to me. It was like that. It was very, I mean, even talking about it now, I'm getting a physical reaction to just remembering it. It was awful. And it felt every time like I was being given a great big diamond, and I was looking at it and staring at it almost in awe, and it made me feel so fuzzy and warm, and it was everything I ever wanted. And then it was like it was snatched out of my hand, flushed down the toilet, and I was told that I'd literally just imagined it, and that I wasn't worth a diamond because I was just a piece of shit, and who would ever give me a diamond anyway? So it was emotionally abusive, there's no doubt, but it also was characterised by that trauma bond pattern of behaviour. But like I said, their instigators are different. Like, some of them are highly manipulative or very emotionally abusive. Some are very verbally abusive. Some are not. They just withhold contact completely. They will literally just be like, oh, not talking to you for a few days now, not answering your calls. reading your messages but not answering them, because I know how it makes you feel and I want that response as the instigator, you know? It's about that, it's power play. The more that the ensnared person receives this treatment, whatever this treatment is, the more desperate they become to put it right, to save the relationship, to show the instigator that they are the only one that can understand, or they want to help, or they want to be there. And it becomes a more and more desperate need. And again, you're getting wound tighter and tighter. The cortisol's going through the fucking roof, and you're waiting for that endorphin spike when you are acknowledged again, when you are brought back into the warm, safe place again. Again, you know, just talking about it, I'm remembering it is addictive. And to pull myself out of it was very difficult. I had to cut contact completely, and believe me, the instigator in my case did not like that. As soon as I withheld the control, I began to see him behave the way I had been behaving for the previous 6 months, and that was very interesting. To watch the instigator become the ensnared when you cut off contact is intriguing, to say the least. I hope I've managed to adequately put across that trauma bonds are different, and the way that instigators behave is different. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And like I said, the level of awareness of what you're doing as an instigator, I think, is on a spectrum. Not all instigators are cut from the same cloth. One of the things that really characterizes a trauma bond is that it doesn't start out the way that it ends up. You know, initially in the first few weeks or even the first few months of a trauma bond, sometimes you are going to find that most of your bonding does appear to be done around positive or meaningful experiences, not really like negative, very high drama, engineered experiences. And then it turns into that. You might find that it starts with things like off-color remarks, demeaning comments that are designed to get a rise out of you or make you feel uncomfortable. Withholding of contact is a really big one. You'll find that suddenly out of nowhere you're just being ignored for 3, 4, 5 days and getting more and more irate or stressed or worried about it, only to realise that that person has kind of instigated that as a measure of control over you. Trauma bonds can also be characterised by the constant threat of abandonment. You know, if you don't do this, I'm going to leave you. I feel like walking away. You know, you're making me feel like I want to walk away from you. Give me a reason that I shouldn't. Threatening it and using the withholding of communication to make the ensnared person feel like shit. Yeah, you know, I've been abandoned, I've been rejected. That is used as a measure of control. A big one with trauma bonding, a massive thing that characterises a trauma bond as well, in the romantic sense, which is how most trauma bonds occur in adult life, is the use of sex rather than verbal communication to resolve issues. Now, I think that this is something that on its own, as a singular event, doesn't necessarily have to spell something more odious. But if it's happening over and over again, if there is the use of sex and the intensity of sex and sexual closeness to resolve issues, rather than actually talking about them, confronting them, and deciding how to resolve them, that's a huge red flag right there. If it's combined with anything else that I've said in the course of this video, then it's an even bigger red flag. It's a massive red flag on the horizon. Please pay attention to that red flag. Okay, when we have issues and when we recognise unhealthy patterns in our relationships with someone, we should be able to say, hey, let's talk it out and actually feel like you have resolved it. If you find that there is not much talking and there is not much deciding on what the next steps are because you've just fucked each other's brains out and now everything feels okay and normal again, then that's a problem. Point blank, period. I don't care what anyone says, that's a problem, up and down, and I see that for what it is. Social isolation is often a characteristic in trauma bonding. Either the instigator wants you to get away from a certain friend or family member, probably somebody who's been trying to help you to unensnare yourself from the relationship, and the instigator wants you away from that person and they might set up an ultimatum. Or it might just be way more subtle than that. It might just be the case that on some level the instigator is making you feel like it's either them or the other people in your life, and whenever you do try to spend time with other people in your life, the instigator might become cold, they might become emotionally distant, they might withhold sex from you, they might withhold contact from you. So they make it clear in a non-verbal and highly manipulative way that you're not allowed to have close relationships with others. Again, this doesn't have to be something that goes on as part of a trauma bond, but it's definitely definitely something that can characterize it. There's a phrase that's been coined in recent years, love bombing, and that also can be characteristic of a trauma bond as well. The instigator will sometimes use, you know, displays of love and affection, very extreme, very full on, very over the top, to keep the ensnared person interested and believing that there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, that there will come a time where the ensnared and the instigator will be one, and there won't be any more of these fights, and there won't be any more of this, you know, ignoring of them or rejecting of them. Love bombing is something that I experienced in my trauma bond really severely. It was like from very, very early on in the relationship, this person was pressuring me for a more stable commitment. They were proposing all kinds of things that were just very weird for someone in the opening phases of a relationship, like plans to travel, plans to move in together. You know, you need to come back with me to the city where I go to uni. When I go back to uni, we should live together literally within a few weeks. I was bowled over by these displays of affection, and it really, you know, meant so much to me, and it felt so real. Now looking back, seeing what was actually happening there, that he was very sort of cleverly almost drugging me up full to the eyeballs, so that when he snatched that attention away and made me feel like I was nothing, the reaction would be even more extreme. And actually right at the end, almost near the end of the trauma bond, it hadn't gotten as bad as it did get for me, but pretty near the end, he did actually admit to me that he wanted my reactions to his cruel behaviour to be more extreme, and he saw my more measured reaction, as he saw it, to be a sign that I didn't love him enough. So he actually admitted he was looking for my fuse to go down and for me to fucking blow. That was what he wanted. He wanted to see that. He saw that as a sign of my love and commitment to him, and any response that was more measured, that didn't involve crying or, you know, curling up in a ball with my heart breaking, he was upset by that. He saw that as a sign that my feelings for him were lukewarm, basically. So he actually kind of admitted his own game there in a way. Obviously there's loads of situations in your life where somebody showers you with love and affection and praise and makes you feel like you're the only person in the world, and it's completely benign. It's just a nice thing to do for someone, but normally the way that you can tell that love bombing has an insidious agenda is through what actually happens next. What is the thing that happens after the love bombing? Because if what happens next is that you are finding that you can't get in touch with that person for 3 days because they're ignoring you, or they are belittling you in front of other people, or showering you with demeaning comments, otherwise taking away what they've just bestowed upon you for effect, then yeah, that could be a trauma bond. If you then feel like you've got to do something to get that love back, you've got to jump through a series of hoops, you've got to do a series of clever tricks to get that love or that focus and affection back, that's a trauma bond. After a while, the effects of a trauma bond become increasingly more obvious to the people that are around the ensnared person. And at that point, people might start to try to say, look, this relationship isn't healthy, you really need to get away from this person is not treating you fairly. And that is something that is hugely characteristic of a trauma bond, and it's characteristic of the umbrella of emotional abuse as a rule. I think that after a while, loved ones, family members, friends, even if they've been pushed away as part of a kind of social isolation technique employed by the instigator, will go to the ensnared person, the entrapped person, and say, look, you know, this is not healthy, this is not normal, you should not be treated this way. If you're in a situation where more than one individual is trying to talk to you about the nature of your relationship and expressing concern about the nature of your relationship, you really might want to start to take that a bit more seriously. Obviously there are nuances and there are complexities in relationships and stuff, but I think if there's a handful of people around you letting you know that they're concerned for you, that's something that's worth looking at. And that's particularly worth looking at if they've known you for a long time, or if they actually don't know each other, they're not mutually involved with each other. It could be like your mum, your best friend and a work colleague all saying to you like, hey honey, this is not okay. Then that's really something that's worth looking at. Try not to skip over that, even if it makes you feel concerned, even if you feel like, oh, I really don't want to lose this person though, and you guys don't understand how important they are to me. Even if it does concern you and you don't really want to look at it and confront it, do try to look at it and confront it, because it could be an important breakthrough moment for you where you realise that a relationship is actually not healthy and it's not helpful for you, and the dynamics of that relationship are very probably not going to change, and if they are going to change, you are not going to be the one that is going to help the instigator to change their behaviour. Likewise, and look, let's just get really shadowy here, let's jump into the shadowy shit right now, okay? If you are listening to this thinking, I'm the instigator, I actually am the one playing the games, I'm the one engineering the rows, I'm the one withholding contact, I'm the one trying to get a rise out of my partner. If that's you, you've got to sit down and take a long, hard look in the mirror. And if your partner is being warned by their friends and family about your behaviour, if you're finding that your partner is experiencing conversations with people in their life about you, it might be a sign that you're doing something that's really ungroovy in the woodshed, sweetie, and you're going to have to sit down, have a Ribena, and have a long, hard think about your life, sunshine. Seriously though, it's not funny. I think it's real and raw to suggest that there are going to be a small cross-section of people who watch this video and hopefully do recognise that they are exhibiting the behaviours more of the instigator than the ensnared. I think there are also going to be a handful of people who recognise themselves as recovered instigators in trauma bonds, who realise that they themselves did get a high from eliciting certain responses from partners, and that they realise that that is an ugly part of their past that they have had to work through and deal with. And if there are any recovered instigators here, if there are any recovered game players, recovered gaslighters, recovered emotional abusers, and you recognise the behaviours of the instigator in yourself as something that was a part of your past, and you recovered from that and you healed from that, please, if you're feeling brave, comment down below and let us know, because I think instigators in trauma bonds, when they start to look at their behaviour and realise, like, shit, yeah, that is what I've been doing and that's not okay, I think they feel very lonely. And I think obviously the majority of the discussion that takes place around trauma bonds and emotional abuse and things of that nature take place among people who were the abused, they were the ensnared, they were the entrapped, or they are the entrapped. I think it's important that instigators also speak up and say, yeah, you know, I am doing these things to elicit these responses, or I did in the past and this is how I dealt with it. Something that's very characteristic of trauma bonds is that the instigator cannot really explain to the ensnared person what they've really done. So when the roller coaster starts to go for a loop-de-loop again, so let's say that the roller coaster's been going along quite nicely, you've had your little 5 minutes of contentment and peace and harmony, right? Then suddenly it goes through the loop-de-loop-de-loop again, and it all goes extreme and chaotic, etc. By design. Normally during the aftermath, when the ensnared person is trying so hard to get back to a state of normality with the instigator, the ensnared person may say to the instigator, like, what have I done? Tell me what I've done wrong. I need to put it right. At which point the instigator is very likely to say, you know exactly what you've done. You know, how dare you come to me and ask me that? You know what you've done. How can you not know what you've done? And it will be very much about trying to dodge the question of what the ensnared person has really done, and much more about laying that blame squarely on them for not realising, you know, how bad they are, how unworthy they are, what a mistake they've made. If you find that you're constantly getting into these extreme, like, high drama kind of disagreements or confusions with someone about what the fuck is going on, and they tend to respond to your questions by saying things like, you're too stupid, or you're too selfish to see what you've done. Or another classic one is, if you can't figure it out by yourself, or if you don't know by now, all of that shit, if that's happening to you, seriously, you've got to start walking in the other direction, okay? If you've done something really that offensive or really that egregious, the other person should be able to explain to you what you have done and why they feel that you need to say sorry or do something to make amends. They should be able to break it down for you, okay? If they can't fucking break it down for you in plain English, or whatever your mother tongue is, then that's not okay. That's no good. If you are ensnared inside a trauma bond where somebody has been sort of instigating these very high drama roller coaster situations, and you're trying to leave the instigator, you might be overwhelmed with feelings of intense longing and fear. You might really feel like, I can't leave this person, I'm going to die if I leave this person. That's actually very common. A trauma bond, as I said, is addictive by its very nature, so of course it's difficult to leave it. It's like leaving a substance behind that you are very fond of and find to be very moreish. 9 times out of 10, if you are the ensnared person in a trauma bond, you do have to realise that you're either going to leave the instigator or you're going to be discarded by them first. 9 times out of 10, that is the situation. Leaving them, first of all, like leaving the relationship, demands that first of all you cope with that feeling of longing from going cold turkey. Yes, it does feel like you are leaving a beloved substance behind. Yes, it does feel uncomfortable. You know, yes, it is not going to be a happy time at first, but in the long term you're going to recognise the huge benefits of doing it and taking your leave of the relationship. You have to recognise as well, though, second of all, that the relationship was never as you really thought that it was. You know, that's how you're going to prevent yourself from going back to that trauma bond. And it's also how you're going to prevent yourself from walking right into the next one. You know, you've got to realise that the relationship was not set up as you thought it was. You were not operating as equals in that relationship. You were not after the same thing. You were both getting high off of the loop-de-loop, the roller coaster loop-de-loop, the hormonal fairground ride, but you weren't getting high for the same reasons and you weren't getting high in the same way. And you have to recognise that. You have to accept that you weren't both singing from the same hymn sheet. If you are in a situation at the moment where you are striving for someone's approval, someone's love, someone's acceptance, and constantly feeling rebuffed, rejected, pushed away, you know, if you feel like you're getting scraps from someone's table but they're not really ever prepared to give you a full meal, they always make you feel like you've got to work so hard for that scrap, and then you're starving hungry again, and you know, they've got nothing for you. If you feel like you're in that situation with someone, I would really recommend that you think about who you're really trying to gain approval from. Is it a parent? Is it a parent? Is it a part of your inner child that is striving so desperately to just be loved unconditionally by mum or dad? That's not always what's going on, but it's what's going on a big cross section of the time, I think. And that's why inner child healing is so important. That's why confronting the needs of the inner child is so important, because we're dragging that stuff around with us in a suitcase from relationship to relationship. And sooner or later, we've got to kick that sucker open and take out what is in there and really look at it and say, you know what, I just want my dad to accept me and love me for who the fuck I am. And I'm not going to get that through banging my head off a brick wall in this relationship. You know, that's not how I'm going to get my inner child feeling nurtured and feeling healthy again. I have to accept that that time has gone and I may never receive that approval. I may never receive that acceptance. But you know what? I'm not going to stay trapped in this feeling of need by trying to get it where I'm never going to get it and where it's never going to be possible to achieve it. You have to say to yourself, I'm not going to give my power away fighting for scraps from someone. I'm going to try and give all of my love, my energy, my focus to myself. I'm going to turn it inward. My inner child needs it right now. I need to give my love and acceptance to every part of me. It's my job now. You've got to fall in love with yourself. And I think that means sometimes starting from right at the bottom, where the thing that you thought meant the absolute most to you, that you would have killed and died for, is no longer feasible. It's no longer viable for you. And it's scary and it's lonely. But sometimes that is where you have to begin. And you have to begin with knowing that you're worth so much more than what that relationship was giving to you or how it was making you feel. I think you've also really got to figure out what your buttons are and how people manage to press them. And I think this is good work for anyone, whether they are in the midst of a trauma bond or not, whether they feel like they're being emotionally abused or not. It doesn't matter. I think this is a good exercise for anyone, to be honest. If you know what your buttons are and how they can be pressed and why they are there and what they remind you of that gets you so riled up, it's going to be harder and harder and harder for anyone to press those buttons, pull those levers, fuck with you, make you do their bidding, create a little marionette puppet out of you. You've got to know what your buttons are. I know what a lot of my buttons are now because I've sat there and thought about it. I've watched in the rearview mirror the time someone's pressed my buttons over and over again, known how to manipulate me into the shape they want me to be in. And I've gone willingly. I've exploded into a rage, or I've admitted, yes, take everything, take all my power, take everything I have, manipulate me. I've looked at that and I've thought, there's a button there. There's a button there. And I really need to look at why that's there, and I need to make sure that I know it's there, so I know that when somebody tries to push it, I don't have to respond the way they expect me to or the way they want me to. It doesn't have to go down like that. I'm in control. So I really would welcome you to think about what your buttons are. Where are your levers inside that people can pull to get a specific reaction from you? You know, how do you work? How would somebody get the jackpot out of the slot machine that is you? All right. And then just really think to yourself, not today, honey bunny, I'm keeping the jackpot for me. All right. What the fuck is with the slot machine analogy? Where are we? Are we in Vegas? Are we in Vegas yet? Damn it. Anyway, darlings, that's all I've got to say about trauma bonding, some of the ways that it can be characterized, the mentality that I hope you can take on it if you find yourself in the midst of it. Darlings, there's so much more I could say. I could literally go for another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, but I won't. But I will make more videos about emotional abuse in the future, and I really hope that these insights have been helpful. Incidentally, as well, you do have until May the 6th, if you're watching this at the time of upload, you have until May the 6th, 2018 to enroll for my 10 password protected videos for the collection known as Bonds of Shadow. So if you found this particular video of interest and you would like to learn more about the shadowy side of human connections and human dynamics, if you want to delve into things like manipulation, projection, betrayal and deceit, mind games, passive aggression, attachment types, if you want to learn about those things on the seedy, ugly underbelly of human connections, and you would like to listen to some password protected goodness from me on lots of those different themes, please do visit the online store. I'm going to leave the link to Bonds of Shadow down below. Come and enroll and you'll get loads of video goodness in your inbox. Okay, so much love, darlings, and blessed be. Mwah.